Very good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of building a software factory. Our product for this project is called Memo, a Notion-style note-taking app entirely built with AI agents and agent loops using Ona. Today, I'm joined by Chris, Ona CTO. Chris, how are you doing?
Good. Great to be here.
Very good. Great to have you. For those of you just joining the series today, every day we're building this app live, bringing you along for the journey in real time, streaming every day at 5 p.m. UK, 9 a.m. Pacific time. On day 1, we already covered the concept, the stack. On day 2, we set up the repo. We talked a little bit about the app shell, about the harness, running the first automation. And today, we're diving a bit deeper into how we actually plan what the agents built. We'll go over in 3 sections: how we build the product spec, how we plan the product spec, how we turn the product spec into issues on GitHub, and then about the automation loops, tying everything together. Maybe, Chris, before we jump in, you can give a quick introduction to yourself, and then we talk a bit more about the product.
Sure thing. So yeah, my name is Chris, CTO at Ona, and these days I think and care a lot about automating the development of software, and this comes from a place where building software with agents now is almost, I don't want to say yesterday's news, but it kind of is. Which is also absolutely wild. Like, the velocity with which things change is just crazy, honestly. And like, if you just think about how we wrote software, even a year ago, has nothing to do with what we do today. But at the same time, it's so clear where things are heading, and that we're seeing more and more automation, like true automation in software with machines, as in agents that are now finally capable of actually doing that. So I spend a lot of my time together with a really small team, thinking about that, like how these processes get tied in, how this affects the SDLC, what are the likely next bottlenecks. I mean, we all know review, but obviously what comes after that. And this is very, very exciting. So thank you for having me.
Amazing. Great. Now we'll dive a bit deeper into what you've already built later on in the session. But maybe let's start looking back from end of yesterday's session to today. So where we were at the end of yesterday's session, we had the guidelines set up, we had the repo set up, we had the basic packages installed, and we had a fundamental product spec. So let me just bring that up to stage. So we prompted the agent originally with a brief, what we want to build, Notion-style note-taking app, without further detail about what the feature set that we're really looking for is going to be, and it did some assessments. So if we look into the initial product spec, there was a vision point and had the target users, which was an assumption by the agent, given that we were talking a lot about developer focus on the product. We had a design direction that we had in our initial spec. And there was also some technical decisions. Again, this is something where the agent went and took some freedom to let me just double check. Sorry. We wanted to go into the original one, and then we go to where we got to. So this was the basic product spec that we had initially. As you can see, there was a basic scope, block-based rich text editor, our workspace organization, a quick overview what's in scope, what's out of scope, and a design direction, as well as technical notes. You can go basically in an empty repo. You can use the planner mode from Ona and get a much more in-depth spec than this. And this is basically what we did as a first step that you can see here. And we can quickly dive into what we did in the chat. So again, we used the plan mode here in Ona, went into the chat and prompted the agent to review the documentation that we already have in the repo, as well as the product spec in itself. In particular, wanted to do a final review and a scope about the products that we're gonna be building. The agent then reviewed. Yep.
So for those not familiar with plan mode, what is that?
Well, plan mode is basically a thinking mode if you're more familiar with some of the other AI tools. But instead of going directly to execution, plan mode takes a step back and reviews what the user actually wants. And we can see here from our initial prompt, which again didn't have extreme level of detail, it actually realizes what's missing for it to produce a great output. It will go through a number of questions to the user to really figure out, okay, what is it that we're trying to build? So for example, in this spec here, the agent originally assumed that we want to use tap or block node. In practice, we wanted to use lexical. So I specified here that we want to use lexical as our rich text editor. It then went through a couple of iterations to figure out with me as a user whether that's the right scope and whether it should use that to ultimately bring that into scope. As you can see, it can do research as well and automatically does the research for the decisions that you're taking. And it's, generally speaking, a way more in-depth tool that helps guide the actual implementation in the long run. So as you can see, there's a lot of thinking involved. It does a lot of background research on the individual decisions that you're taking or you're prompting it to take. And the final output usually is a spec file. In this case, I prompted it to create the product spec because the product spec is what we're actually using for our feature planning automation. We'll go into that in the future and later on. But yeah, so our product spec then comes to a more detailed documentation if you compare it to the spec that we had at the very beginning. So you can see there's a bit more technical decision level here. There's more scope of what we actually want to build on the product side when it comes to authentication, when it comes to workspaces, for example, that every user is supposed to have their own personal workspace automatically provisioned when they first sign up, the way we handle pages, the way we handle the editor, search, members, and the app shell itself. What we also define is what's out of scope for this initial product. So initial product, we can go into that in a second, is basically what we've built since launching the first automations. And so we just took out of scope some more complex features like the real-time collaboration, which we can still add, database views, third-party integrations, et cetera, et cetera. But this is really where I think the product shines in coming up from like the plan mode and iterative process to a like really spec driven development. And this product spec then becomes the core of the automations that we're using to build the product. So
there's one little feature here that I really love. So if you hover over any point in the spec, you see that plus button on the left. And so what you can do with that is you can add comments to your spec. And so if just for fun, add one. If you type something in there and then hit add comment. No, add comment.
Oh, sorry.
So one is you can send it directly to owner, which is what happened now. But you can also accrue a set of comments in there, so you can pile them up basically. So yeah, you do that. You go and add comment, and now add one more somewhere else. It doesn't matter what it says. We're not going to send it. Right, and now in the comments tab on the right, in your there you go. Okay, the other one somehow didn't
come up. We'll try that again.
Didn't come up. This reloads because the agent's currently working. So
exactly.
Either way, you can accrue comments like this, and when ONA isn't working, right now it's working because we accidentally sent that one comment, but if it's not, there you go, it's enabled now. And so with this, what you can do is you can essentially pile up a whole set of things that ONA should do and send them off at once. And with that, you can give instructions to the agent to do more work. That doesn't just work for spec, like it's incredibly useful for spec, but it also works for code. And in fact, ONA can review its own code and show them to you as comments. They get this kind of review experience in here. And the whole point of this is to give more work to the agent and reduce the number of times it needs to bug you. So when you think about agentic workflow workflows, what we see is that what we're really trying to do is we're trying to push the time between the agent asking you and it doing something. We're trying to extend that time further and further, right? Like ideally, like full background agents, the agent doesn't need to ask you something explicitly ever. So it's basically infinity. But on the road to get there, we're trying to move from minutes to hours. And a key problem with doing that is giving the agent enough work. They're surprisingly quick at doing things. And so this specification, this comment way, is a really, really fine way to lengthen the windows in which the agent demands your attention.
It's also a great user experience when you think about Spec, because a lot of the time the Spec is not out of the box aligned with your thinking or aligned with your vision. So this really gives you the ability to go in without losing much time to adapt it and give you comments as a bulk, which is great. Cool. So maybe we look at Spec now. Once you have a Spec, right, the next step in the process is really how do we translate Spec into issues that we develop from. Again, what I mentioned yesterday and what I mentioned earlier is we then use a feature planner. So a feature planner can work in multiple ways. You can either, again, when we look at owner as your interface to start this development. And as you said, Chris, there's like kind of a ramp-up process as you build out a software factory. There is some work and groundwork to be done in the initial setup. This is what we've done as we go from, you go manual to complete automation. There is a little bit of a ramp, and we're already well on the way to be completely automated, which is great. But from a Spec, you need to build features. So we have set up an automation. This is something that you can run directly either through the automations tab. When you take the product spec, and I can show you this here, you can then run the feature planner, which is right here. It does take the product spec and translates it into the individual issues, and we can look into the definition to kind of understand what it does. Right, so it is basically a prompt, and this is why you can also run it directly in the owner interface. It reads the prompt, it understands the guidelines, the documentation, the agents in D file, your architecture that you've chosen. And then in this case, we have come up, the agent has itself come up through an agent loop that we figured out in the first session when we ultimately designed the automations, how we can interact with GitHub issues to work with a label convention that helps the automations itself understand what's going on, what's in work, what's in progress. And you can see that when you go into the GitHub repo. And this is also like part of what makes it so powerful, because it can do a lot itself, but it can also label and flag certain issues for the developer to review if it gets stuck. But yeah, maybe like the decomposition is the key here, right? We come from a spec which is quite long, has a lot of features, and we need to figure out, okay, how do we chunk this into digestible issues that the agents then can go and implement? So I think an important part, especially at the beginning of setting up the software factory, is looking into single concern issues and making sure that we build step by step, right? If you look into the future and you have an app that's already quite evolved, you can obviously flip the switch and go completely parallel. But as we go from 0 to 1, we really want to make sure that we build the groundwork. So you need to set up your database, you need to set up your authentication floor before you continue building new features. And this is what the agent ultimately does. So maybe we jump quickly into the repo and look what the agent has done. As you can see, all the issues that we already had today were closed. So let's go into the closed issues and look what it has done. As you can see, it did sequential work, which would you would expect. So it sets up the database, it sets up the authentication flow, goes into building an app shell, works with the workspace and the workspace switchers, and then goes into building the individual steps and features that we had in the initial spec. And as you can see as well, it identifies bugs itself. This is, I think, the really cool feedback loop that we're getting into once we're going to speak about implementation, right? How do we close back into realizing the bugs and the issues that we have while building and getting to like an autonomic software development process. But as you can see, right, the speed of development is insanely fast. And if we compare that to our pull requests, so you can see we already have 52 closed. Again, quality is always something that you can't measure necessarily with quantity, but we see that the agent is working fairly autonomously. So ultimately, where we're at now is we've kind of completed the initial product spec, and we'll now have to go in, see what works, see what doesn't work, look a little bit into the UI. And again, the app is already live. So if you want to give it a test, you can directly go to memo.software-factory.dev, create an account, sign up, give it a test. But this is basically the incredible thing. Within less than a day of work, we've come to build basically the initial product spec. And this gives us the ability now to really think about, okay, what is the feature set we really want to build here? And how do we get there? And maybe
let me jump in there again. You said something here that is interesting. Like, you can't measure quality, and this is something that we get asked a lot. You know, our customers ask us a lot. Okay, so we're employing agents. How do we make sure that we not only gain speed, you know, we get faster, but we also move in the right direction? So we increase velocity, not just speed. And part of that obviously is quality. Like, what good does it do to accrue code if your quality goes down? And to be completely frank, the jury is still out a bit. But the first data that we see is very promising. And data here meaning data in our own practice and production, but also that of our customers. For example, what we see repeatedly is how the mean time to recovery goes down. So we get faster at resolving incidents. And part of that is because agents help us with it, but also part of that is because the quality of the code doesn't actually suffer. The other is change failover rate goes down. And that's because we get better at writing tests. And so a good part of setting up this spec and a good part of setting up a repo like this is to provide and instruct the agent to build good foundations. So to build to repeatedly pay attention to tests, and like all up and down the test pyramid. You know, this isn't just your unit tests, of course, like up and down, and to repeatedly uphold and verify standards. And I know we'll look at that in a later episode. The thing I want to leave you with, as you're thinking about a software factory and really the introduction of agentic development to your organization as a whole, think of agents like an afterburner that you strap onto your organization. And so either you withstand the acceleration and you're going 2, 3, 4, 5 times faster than you ever have, or you come undone in midair. And so this is really a question of how good are your foundations. And so really the thing to take from this, as you're building out this factory, invest in the foundation. That's exactly what Zach is showing here. As you're building the spec out, a key part of it isn't just the functional elements and the breakdown into individual issues, but also the how should this work. You know, there was an element here where Zach showed how you drove this towards making a particular component choice, you know, choosing one editor over another. And the same generalizes to how you want the agent to operate. And there are many ways to encode that in the spec, in skills, in adversarial agents that sort of verify some other agents' work, and we'll touch on all that. The main thing I want to leave you with is, as you're thinking about building out the software factory, think about the processes and the controls that you want in place, much like you would if this was an all-human enterprise.
Exactly. I mean, the opinionation, I think, is still important, and where the know-how and really, as you say, right, like you can't build an airplane that goes extremely fast if you haven't gotten a good airframe. So you need to have the fundamentals right, and you need to steer the agent towards the goal that you have envisioned. Obviously, the actual coding becomes almost trivial, but as we go along building this product, there will be a lot of choices and design choices that we still need to make, and we'll obviously take you along. I think if we look a little bit more into the process, right? We talked a bit about we need to spec, we need to drive from spec to issues. We need to then take our issues and deploy them. But maybe like we can tie quickly back into why we do certain design choices and like think about the automations that ultimately drive this, right? We, in our case, have set up a number of automations, and you find them in the repo as well, that we deploy. At the core is obviously a review automation that goes into all of our pull requests and reviews the quality, leaves comments, and you can also see the comments on the repo, which is quite nice to look into, read through, and see how this iterative process works. But also, the automations that go into the issue list. An interesting one, as well as if you look at the issues, is obviously the code quality or the quality of issues. Right now, all the issues are created by the agent according more or less to a template that it can read out, and it has the number of detail that it requires. But it's also very interesting to think about, once, given this is an open source repo, once we open the repo to external feedback and issue creation, how we can triage the issues, how we can ensure that the issues have a certain number or certain level of feedback, and do the automation loop without the human in the loop when it comes to new product suggestions, new feature suggestions, any bug fixes that are discovered by users and not automatically discovered. So that's obviously a very interesting loop to think about as well. But yeah, I think there's...
What we find in our own practice is, as we think about these sort of automation loops that do the kind of triaging that you're just speaking of, or automatically pick up work, that isn't necessarily triaged or filed yet. Same for review. There is a sort of progressive escalation that is very useful, where you have the agent essentially assess how well it can do something, and based on that, act in different ways. And the ultima ratio is always escalating to a human. So, for example, for our own PR reviews, what we do is we have essentially a risk ladder where if it's a low-risk change, the agent will approve it. And if it's a high-risk change, for example, because it touches authentication code or the database, it gets escalated to a human. And the exact same thing works really, really well in all these kinds of assessment loops. So as you're planning, as you're having agents that triage work and break down the spec into smaller pieces, or break down too large issues that a user might have filed into smaller pieces, it is really useful to think of this as like a multi-stage process, or like a sieve in a way, where you get to progressively finer grit. And whenever something gets stuck, you know how to handle it. So for example, if you think about a triage agent, think about like one of the steps that the agent needs to do is it needs to assess its own confidence in the judgment it passes. Do I, the agent, believe this can meaningfully be solved or not? And then adding these like loops within a loop where the agent critically reflects on its own judgment. And if not, like whenever it goes, okay, I cannot do that, either hands off to another agent, adds a label to an issue, and then some other loop comes in and does something with it, or escalates that to a human. So these loops aren't just closed systems, but they interact with each other, of course, but they always have an escalation path to humans. And I think this is another key lesson that we learned in building automated code bases, is it's so easy to feel the need to drive to maximum automation from day one.
I think
100% automation.
An important differentiation and kind of design choice to make is also like when you, for example, in our case, right, we're heavily depending on loops right now, rather than going into the orchestration mode, right? Like in some architecture, you could think about having a single automation, just reviewing everything and then orchestrating sub agents. That obviously works as well. But especially if you look at the development lifecycle, you want to chunk certain automations down. So in our example, right now, two of the core automations are the PR reviewer and the bug fixer, right? Currently, they're instructed as we're like at the beginning of the setup, and a lot of the issues are sequential still. That we don't continue with a PR fix until a bug that's attached to this issue is fixed, to make sure that we build up sequentially and actually work out any issues that we have. But again, because everything is in the loop and works almost instantly, you see this speed of development that is extremely cool to see. Just as I see it in the comments, the URL of the demo app is memo.software-factory.dev. You can find everything on the software-factory.dev website as well. And I think we've covered a lot around the automation loops today. Tomorrow we'll be looking a little bit more into implementing how the agent actually goes about implementation work. We'll go into the pull requests, talk a bit about what worked well, what doesn't work well. Again, we're back tomorrow at 5 p.m. And until then, I think we've covered quite a bit. Please feel free to go have a look at the repo, have a go at the demo app. And yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks for joining today, Chris. It was a pleasure to have you. And any questions for him, please feel free to reach out to us. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.